You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC with me, Regina Fythinarthen. Now to Gaza, where the United Nations says at least 9 people have been killed and scores injured after 2 Israeli tank rounds hit a building at a training centre in the south where 800 displaced people had taken shelter. Israel's yet to comment on this, but it said its ground forces have encircled the city of Khan Yunis, targeting what they believe is a significant base for Hamas, which is designated a terror organisation by many Western governments. Israel says it's ordered people who are still there to leave. Thomas White from the United Nations Agency for Palestinians, UNRWA, and he's in Rafah monitoring events in Khan Yunis.
We understand 2 tank rounds hit a building in the training centre. It was actually the building where we teach carpentry. There are about 800 people who've been seeking shelter in that building. It's a mass casualty situation. Right now, the team, which comprised of UNRWA but also WHO and some ambulances, have evacuated 45 people from the facility, and they're having to take them to a hospital in Rafah because the hospital 5 minutes away is currently inaccessible due to IDF presence in that area.
And have you had any communications with the Israeli military?
We are in constant contact with the Israeli military, updating them on a very regular basis about where all our facilities are, and particularly during the war, where people are seeking shelter, where civilians are seeking shelter. So they are very aware of this location. But we've been trying to get access to this population and to these staff members for the last 2 days. And it was only after this carpentry building in the Khan Yunis training centre was hit by tank fire that we finally got access to that building. It's now a medical evacuation as we're evacuating tens of people with very serious blast injuries from that UN-protected building.
The Israeli military says it's battling Hamas in Khan Yunis and that they completed their encirclement of the city. They believe that that is where there is a large number of members of Hamas there. What is happening in the wider area of Khan Yunis? You mentioned hospitals as well. Of course, Khan Yunis is where many internally displaced people have gone to since the conflict began.
I mean, what I can speak to is where people are seeking shelter, and there are tens of thousands of people seeking shelter in UNRWA schools and also the training centre. We have 2 health clinics in this area. There are also 3 major hospitals. Right now, there's a real risk that the Nasser hospital complex, which is the largest remaining hospital in the south of Gaza, will be forced to close. The Israeli army needs to meet its obligations under international humanitarian law and respect the fact that this is a civilian population, that they need to ensure that they take precautions to minimise harm and protect the civilians caught up in the conflict.
Can I ask you a little bit more about Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, which you just mentioned? It's the largest hospital which is still functioning in Gaza, to my understanding. It was only a day ago that your agency, UNRWA, was describing the conditions in that hospital, staff terrified, patients as well. Can you paint a picture of what you're hearing from your teams on the ground in that hospital today?
Look, we haven't had any teams in the hospital today. What I can say is that this is a hospital which is its capacity continues to be degraded as it's increasingly difficult for staff to maintain services in those hospitals because, A, they don't have access to the hospital, or they're running out of necessary medical supplies. The hospital is also hosting thousands upon thousands of internally displaced people seeking protection in the hospital grounds. Every bed is full. There are people recovering from surgery in the corridors, and there are also their family members and IDPs in the corridors and all of the grounds of the hospital. And so while you're at the hospital, literally every 15 to 20 minutes, there are more ambulances arriving with, severely injured people.
You're in Rafah. What's it like where you are?
Rafah, it was a relatively sleepy town, 280,000 people. It's now an absolute sea of humanity. We estimate there are 1.4 million Gazans now in Rafah. Every open space within the city has some sort of temporary or makeshift plastic shelter with people literally living on the streets. It's literally a very large informal camp where people, who continue to move originally from the north of Gaza, increasingly from the centre, and now from Khan Yunis. And there are tens of thousands of people on the road today coming south and trying to find what little patch of land is available to set up a very flimsy plastic structure to live under.
And just want to put this to you. Israel said on Monday that it was making efforts to help keeping hospitals running and to ensure that it's making sure that fuel is being delivered, as well as medical aid. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
The reality is that the humanitarian situation here is getting worse. The humanitarian needs of the people of Gaza are not being met, and they are being forced further and further south into an area of Gaza that is not set up to be supporting 4 times its normal population.
That's Thomas White from the UN speaking to me earlier from Rafah in southern Gaza.